Welcome back to BRC Fallow Deer. You know, when we got into this deer business, people told us it would always be low stress, and you know, all you got to do is have some deer out in a pen, and you raise some fawns, and you watch them run around in the grass, and watch your yearling bucks grow, thinking about the potential that they've got for the future, and bringing different genetics to the herd. And a lot of times that's kind of how it is. You just kind of keep on keeping on, watching them grow and keeping them fed and watered and healthy. And of course, watching the big bucks grow, that's always enjoyable, especially this year. The way Sitting Bull has grown out, he's pretty impressive to see in person. But we went to an event down in Texas a couple weeks ago, and at a joint deal between Cross Canyon Wildlife and Caveman Wildlife. And the person doing our chores sent us this picture. Now, fortunately, she was smart enough to look at the animals closely, make sure everything's okay, and also when she saw something abnormal, she sent us a picture. So we appreciate that. But of course, things always happen when you're away. Now, if you followed along, you might recognize this deer as one we call Bonnie. She was a bottle-fed doe fawn from 2024, and she'd made several appearances, including this award-winning photo that I took. Now, raising her hasn't come without troubles. She had an abscess as a fawn, and we ended up sedating her after attempting to drain and rinse that abscess or flush that abscess with her awake, which was unsuccessful. We ended up sedating her, and I did it with her asleep, which is a fairly stressful situation with a 7 or 8 pound fawn. But she recovered from that well, and has done great up until a couple weeks ago. I don't know how the injury happened. She just had a 3 or 4 inch gash along the back side of her jaw. I don't know whether she stuck it in the fence or got it. I just don't know what happened. But regardless, we knew when we got home we'd have to address it. So, first thing we did after coming back from our 4 or 5 day, industry visitation, I guess, we went to NT Exotics, Baron Exotics, and 4T Fallow, and we also visited Damn Wild, which are all cool things to see in person. But we came back to this. So we got Bonnie into the barn, into the chute. When we first got there, she was out by herself, very lethargic. You could tell that she probably hadn't been eating very well. I can imagine the muscle on the backside of her jaw, it was painful to chew. It was just not a very good situation. I'm glad we weren't gone any longer. But we got her in the barn, and the first thing I wanted to do was, of course, take her temperature. I was worried about infection, and that's a good way to see, what's going on. Now, it was a hot day, but her initial temperature was 104 or a little bit higher than that, which is pretty high. So we needed to address the temperature before I felt comfortable sedating her to address the cut. I also felt like, since she probably hadn't been eating and hadn't been feeling very good, that I needed to get some fluids into her. Now, I'm not a veterinarian. There's several ways to give fluid to animals, and she was being a little bit lively in the chute, and I was nervous about giving her fluids in the neck. So I ended up just doing it sub-Q, which you can do with animals. It's just a pretty slow process. I don't think it cools them down, quickly like giving them fluids more directly into their system might do. But it was the option that I elected to take, just because I was afraid I wouldn't be able to keep the needle in her, and we were trying to get the cut addressed, and it was hot, and I was just trying to get things moving along. Now, the other thing we were doing to help cool her off was spraying her with water. We went and got a couple fans, and you can't see them. Well, you might be able to see it in that picture, but just kind of lightly misting them with water. You don't really want them soaking wet, but it's the evaporative cooling that's cooling the animal down. So we open the sides of the chute, as you can see, misted her with water, and let that airflow evaporate the water, which I think was pretty effective in getting her body temperature down. Of course, I also gave antibiotics, as well as a kind of a painkiller. The antibiotics were going to be pretty important, I think, just because of that exposed muscle. I know I didn't get a real good picture of what it looked like up close, but it was pretty nasty. It didn't look infected. There was a little bit of kind of a tear in the muscle that was maybe kind of dead. It was kind of black looking, and I did remove that. But antibiotics, painkiller, and fluids, and of course getting her temperature down, that was important. Now I knew I was going to have to sedate her, but I was hoping to just give her just enough to kind of calm her down, but she went to sleep right away with a very low dose of a sedative, which in the end was probably a good thing, I suppose. Of course, step one of addressing the cut is cleaning it. And now it was fairly clean. There wasn't dirt or anything in there. Being on the side of her face, I don't think she was rubbing it on stuff. At least it didn't look like. But I started by flushing the cut out with iodine, just to kind of, use the antiseptic. I get that right? Antiseptic power of iodine. Cleaned off my tools, and like I said, cut that little kind of dead flap of muscle off. And then it was going to stitching the thing up. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not a vet. I don't think I've ever stitched anything up before. It was about the time I started that I realized I have no idea how to tie a knot. So when I was done, it kind of looked like the top laces of a tennis shoe. Just kind of, if you can't tie good knots, you just tie a lot. That kind of idea. Now again, I didn't see any visual sign of what I would call infection. The high body temperature is kind of indicative of that. There being some amount of infection anyway. So the antibiotics were probably the most important thing, and I also think the painkiller. That way she could get back to eating and moving around and not being so lethargic. And also, of course, drinking water and not getting dehydrated. But the risk of these stitches, and I knew it was a risk. Now, if I was better at stitching things up, maybe this would have turned out differently. But unfortunately, she was able to reach her jaw with her back foot. So I could tell, even before we got her in the barn, she was kind of pawing at the injury with her back foot. It probably itched or hurt or whatever. And I was afraid that she was going to catch a paw in those stitches, or hoof. Not a paw, that's the wrong kind of animal. I was afraid she'd catch a hoof in the stitches. So after we did get this done, the next day, I believe we got her in again. I was trying to focus on the painkiller, the Banamine, at that point, because I was thinking if it doesn't hurt, maybe she won't mess with it. So the day after we did stitches, we got her in again, gave her Banamine. She was pretty rowdy on the chute. So day 2 or 3 or whatever, the day after that, rather than run her through again, I was worried about her getting injured in the chute, just because she was starting to get a little panicky the previous day. And so I ended up darting her with Banamine. Now, it's funny because you would think that would be a much more traumatic event, getting shot with a dart. But I threw some corn out, shot her. She ran off, and about 10 seconds later came back and was eating corn with the dart hanging out of her. So it's interesting how the animals react differently than like what I might react if I was to get darted. They just associate pain and feelings differently than we do. So all that being said, unfortunately, day 4, I think it was, she tore out the stitches. So it's a little frustrating because I put the work into stitching her up, but really the most important part of this whole process was getting her hydrated with fluids, getting your body temperature down, and getting antibiotics and painkiller into her. So the stitches were kind of maybe we'll get lucky and this will stay closed kind of thing. So I'm not going to say it was a failure because she tore her stitches out, because we knew that was a risk. And at the end of the day, the other actions we took were more important than stitching the wound closed. Now you can see we've reversed her at this point, and she's kind of waking back up. It was interesting how quickly the sedation worked when they're in a chute rather than with a dart, and I guess that's just getting it deeper into the muscle. where them being calm rather than running around. After we did get it all stitched up, I put some wound coat over it, kind of a spray antiseptic, as well as some, it's a fly spray. It's a permethrin product that I've used for kind of a short-term fly spray. Of course, we have lots of flies right now in the middle of the summer, and the last thing I want is for a fly to get in there and start eating or laying maggots or whatever flies do that can cause problems in open wounds like that. And I was surprised for as lethargic as she was before getting her in the barn. By the time we let her out and gave her an hour or two to kind of fully wake up from being sedated, she was eating hay and eating grain and already acting much better. I would imagine that getting her temperature down was a pretty strong factor there. I'm sure she didn't feel very good with such a fever. But that's just how it goes, you know. It was like I said, a few days later she tore the stitches out, but the wound had kind of dried over, the muscle kind of dried over, and there's no sign of infection at all. She's acting totally normal, which is great. We still have her kind of in a small catch pen just to keep an eye on her. But once that wound kind of fully, I don't know, if calluses over is the right term, she'll go back into the pen with the other yearlings from last year. That's how it goes with animals, you know. They always find a way to hurt themselves in new ways that you or I would have never imagined. But that's just what we live with on any kind of farm, really, whether it's cattle or deer or goats or hogs or whatever. But here's a photo after she tore the stitches out. It looks worse in the picture than it really is, but I think she's going to do okay. We'll give you an update here in a month or two, and thanks for tagging along. It's never ending.